Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating piece of research from the HRM Review on ethics and expatriate development in Brazil. We're going to be looking at the intense complexities of international HR in Brazil, which is a massively lucrative, but honestly immensely challenging market. Think about it. When multinational companies expand, sending their best people abroad as expatriates is a huge financial and strategic investment. But what happens when the very rules of business, management, and even morality shift right beneath their feet? Let's find out. To really wrap our heads around the environment we're talking about, just consider this number, 16,000. That's the estimated number of highly organized labor unions operating in Brazil, particularly in sectors like metalworking and banking. For an incoming manager, this illustrates an intensely volatile labor environment where strikes can literally shut down a city, and where employer federations play a massive role in public policy. You aren't just managing a small team, you're navigating a highly structured, fiercely defended workforce. Now, this kind of environment creates a pretty severe ethical gap. If we look at Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, where higher scores mean a cleaner environment, the United States scores a 7.5, while Brazil scores a 3.9. This drastically different operating environment means an American manager arriving in Brazil is instantly confronted with a heavy bureaucratic machine where, unfortunately, pervasive bribery is often a barrier in both government procurement and private sector operations. So, the real million-dollar question here is this. How do you actually manage a global business when the ethical rules of the game completely change? The stakes of corporate expatriate deployment are incredibly high. A manager can't simply impose their home country's framework without causing massive friction, but at the same time, they're still legally bound by their parent company's standards. It's a literal tightrope walk. To see how companies actually tackle this, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to follow the full life cycle of an expatriate assignment, starting with ethics in Brazilian business, then selecting the right expatriate, cross-cultural training strategies, compensation and performance, and finally, the repatriation process. Let's kick things off with Section 1, Ethics in Brazilian Business, and navigating that ethical chasm. Over the last decade or so, Brazil's labor force has absolutely exploded, now topping 93 million people. But here's the catch. Despite this massive, growing labor pool, multinationals face a severe shortage of skilled middle-level managers. Actually, only a tiny fraction of this workforce has a tertiary education. So, companies are practically forced to rely on expatriate managers simply because finding high-quality local talent for those top-level searches is remarkably difficult. But sending a U.S. manager creates an immediate friction point. On one hand, you've got the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which strictly prohibits paying bribes anywhere, full stop. On the other hand, the local operational realities often dictate that bribery is practically necessary just to get things done. This puts the expat in a profound dilemma. Do you rigidly follow the law of the parent country, or do you adapt to the localized norms of the host country? And this clash of standards, it extends right into human rights. While Brazil has definitely made progress, the research points out the ongoing reality of roughly 4 million children working in the country. Now, the International Labor Organization, or ILO, does distinguish between acceptable, non-harmful work and unacceptable exploitation. But for a foreign manager navigating an environment where child labor is prevalent, especially in those family-owned or smaller firms hidden within the supply chain, presents a really painful collision between home and host country ethical standards.
All right, moving right along to Section 2, selecting the right expatriate. And as we'll see, it goes way beyond just technical skills.
The research brings up this great cautionary tale, the case of Fred Bailey. They call him an innocent abroad, which is pretty fitting. Fred was basically a manager dropped into a foreign culture entirely because he had a great technical track record back home. But as a global manager, he completely lacked the communication and negotiation skills needed for the host country. He was essentially an engineer trying to read a blueprint in the dark. He couldn't include local staff, didn't understand the culture, and to top it off, the HR department didn't even give him time to consider how this massive move would impact his family. So how do disasters like Fred Bailey actually happen? Honestly, it's because of shockingly informal selection processes. The research actually calls it the coffee machine solution. This is where senior managers, chatting casually around the water cooler, practically finalize the selection process before human resources is even involved. HR is often just brought in at the very end to legitimize a decision that's already been made, which completely bypasses any rigorous assessment of cultural adaptability. Instead of relying on water cooler chats, companies really need a strategic matrix.
Think about it. If you're sending someone to an implementer unit just to transfer technical knowledge, then sure, technical competence wins. But if they're heading to an autonomous unit that's developing local knowledge, cultural adaptability, and language skills are absolutely non-negotiable. You just can't use a one-size-fits-all metric for global selection. Okay, so you've got your candidate. Next up is Section 3, Cross-Cultural Training Strategies, or basically, how to survive the culture shock.
A really critical concept the research highlights here is attribution training. Now, this isn't just handing someone a glossy travel brochure about Brazil. It's fundamentally shifting how a manager interprets human interaction. It's about giving the expatriate the skills to think, act, and gain insight directly from the cultural perspective of the host national. It actually uses critical intercultural short episodes to help the expat truly understand why their local counterparts behave the way they do.
And for this training to actually work, it has to be sequential. You start with didactic training, the factual lectures and info. Then you move to experiential training, like look-see trips to the country. After that comes attribution training, and of course, crucial language training. The sources emphasize that relying on just one method completely fails. A sequential combination of these methods, before, during, and even after arrival, is literally the only way to build realistic expectations and reduce severe cultural conflict.
Now for the actual mission itself. Section 4, Compensation and Performance, and the dreaded host country disconnect. So how do you pay an expat fairly without causing a massive headache? HR usually has to balance between two main models. The balance sheet approach tries to maintain the expat's home country living standards plus a few financial incentives. The problem? It can create massive resentment among local Brazilian staff who are paid significantly less for doing very similar work. Alternatively, you have the going rate approach, which relies on local market rates. But that might make the assignment financially unappealing to the expat. It is a constant tug of war for HR to balance these competing interests.
And if you think paying them is tough, evaluating their performance might actually be even harder. Performance appraisals often totally fail because there's this massive home office disconnect. A manager back in the US might evaluate the expat based on rigid, tangible metrics like profit or market share, but they completely ignore uncontrollable local variables, like those massive strikes we talked about earlier, currency devaluation, or sudden inflation.
Just imagine getting a terrible performance review precisely because you adapted well to your new environment. It sounds crazy, right? But the research points out that Brazilian employees are highly team-oriented, and they generally expect a participative decision-making style where they can contribute ideas. If an expat successfully adapts to this and asks their subordinates for input, a home country evaluator, who might view a manager as a strictly authoritative expert, might incorrectly penalize them for managerial incompetence. The evaluator completely misreads a brilliant cultural adaptation as a fundamental weakness.
Which brings us to our final stop, Section 5, the repatriation process, the climax, and honestly, the drop-off.
Just look at this shockingly low fraction, 1/3. According to the research, only 1/3 of multinational firms actually have a structured job repatriation program in place. That means 2/3 of the time, expats return to headquarters to find their responsibilities reduced, no promotion waiting for them, or sometimes no position at all. As a result, many of them simply take their newly acquired, highly valuable global skills and leave the company entirely. It's a huge loss. To stop this massive talent drain, companies really need to rely on a structured checklist. And the key here is that repatriation doesn't actually start when the assignment ends. It has to start before they even leave. Phase 1 is setting clear expectations before departure. Phase 2, while they are away, involves assigning home country mentors to keep them in the loop for future roles. And Phase 3, when they finally return, involves setting up formal avenues for them to share their newly acquired knowledge with the rest of the firm. Retaining global talent absolutely requires planning from day one.
So I really want to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. If an expatriate's hard-won international experience, built over years of navigating ethical chasms and cultural shifts, is truly a company's greatest asset, why do so many firms just squander that massive investment the very moment their people return home? It's a massive strategic blind spot in global corporate management, and one that businesses expanding into diverse markets like Brazil urgently need to fix.